All right, welcome everybody to the episode here of Champions Wave podcast, helping professionals live the life of a champion in all aspects of life, professional, personal, physical, and financial. I have the great, it is an honor, the great James, the noblest of them all, Koble. Welcome, my good friend.
Thank you. Thank you. So I'm glad to be here. Thanks for having me on.
Yep.
Yeah, it's a long time in the making.
Right. Yeah. It's for those that don't know, I've known James for we're going on 14 years, 15 years now.
God, something like that.
Kids
I even
almost graduated
remember
high
talking
school. How
about
long we've
like,
known each
oh,
other.
we should have a podcast. We should do
Yeah.
podcast things.
Right. So, real quick, so kind of an intro on James. So, James himself, he's the COO at BMCS, a cybersecurity consulting company. Before that, he was the program manager for the Department of Defense. He's got 13 years of business development, management experience in defense and cybersecurity industries. So, you know a little bit, just
Just
a tad.
a little bit, about a little bit, or a little bit, about a lot of bit.
Yeah. Um, like I said, I'm super excited to have you here. For those that are listening, we had James and I had a real good conversation when I visited him over the weekend, and I asked him, I said, "Dude, just get you on the podcast, man," because he spew a ton of good facts, good information that would be very useful for anybody who's managing a team and really just from a strategic standpoint trying to grow their career. He's James is probably one of the most like detailed oriented guys and beyond the nicest guy I think I know. um,
Well, well,
um, he knows everything. So I'll give you the format. I think one of the things that we spoke about that I think was really cool that you touched on was you're COO, so you oversee a lot of operations, but it's your ability to allow creativity within constraint, not really constraints. I think constraints is the wrong word, but just guidelines of still making sure things operate at the right speed, getting goals taken care of, everything. So enough of my talk, and I'll let you take the floor. Tell us a little bit about that, my friend.
awesome. Yeah, no, thanks, Sam. I love the concept that you have here, getting better in all aspects of life. I think the angle I'm going to come at it from is probably more professional, because that's the conversation you and I had over
Yeah.
maybe one or two cocktails. Was this conversation about, it really kind of got me thinking, the stressors, right? Like the stressors and how do you succeed as a new executive, a new leader, and growing from one position to another. Because when I started with the Department of Defense, I started in an internship program, and then I became a deputy program manager, and then a program manager. And then when I moved over to this company, I went from one of the largest companies in the world, the Department of Defense, specifically the Air Force, over to a company where I was employee number seven. And my job was sort of it was called business operations manager, and it was just kind of everything. Anything that wasn't engineering was sort of mine. And over time, I've been with this company now for 7 years. I grew with the company. We're a little bit bigger now. And the owner was like, "Yeah, you should be the COO." And making that jump from basically being this person, jack of all trades, to still being a jack of all trades, but also leading people and setting strategic direction for the company and being part of these very high level discussions while also trying to achieve like tactical objectives. Um, it was pretty hard. It's a pretty difficult uh, hurdle to get over.
Mm.
And there's a couple of stressors that you kind of run into, right? Like, um, I'm here to tell you, like, imposter syndrome is real and it never goes away, or at least not forever, right? Like you're like, oh yeah, no, I got this. I'm a smart guy. I've got this handled. I'm good to go. And then every now and then it's like, I hope nobody figures out I'm an idiot. Like, like it's just those days. And you come up with these different strategies to overcome these fears and these stressors. For me, it was, things like overcoming imposter syndrome, like I deserve this role, I deserve, to be here. Fear of failure, I don't like to let people down, and then, communication breakdowns. How do I get ideas across in a way that is actually actionable and people hear what I'm trying to say? And also, listening, right? And I came up with some ways to overcome those, right? Like when it comes to imposter syndrome, part of it is philosophical and part of it is practical.
Mhm.
On the philosophical side, I kind of came to the conclusion that almost everybody feels that way throughout their career. Everyone is thinking, wow, I hope no one realizes I don't know what I'm doing at some point.
What was
Um,
your not to cut you off, but like,
yeah,
how did you come across that? Was that just like a realization, or were you just talking to people and people just kind of opening up to you? Like how'd that?
yeah, a bit of both. I had gained a couple of mentors. I talked to people, around me, and it's like, man, imposter syndrome, and everybody was like, yeah, imposter syndrome, yeah, man, like that's a real thing. It's like, wait, you're like one of the smartest people I know, and you're telling me that you don't think you're right, like you don't think that you are really, really good, and you're really qualified, and you think like, oh man, like people are gonna figure it out. It's like, oh, well, if you feel that way, then everybody must feel that way. And the more people I talk to, and I've talked to a lot of people over the years about it, it's real. I don't know if it's something
Mhm.
that you've ever experienced, Sam. Like
Oh, for sure.
yeah, like, but you gotta be confident. You gotta believe in yourself. Like it's a very philosophical, way to overcome it. But like, you gotta believe it's like, no, I am talented at what I do. I am good at what I do. And those days that you have those little nagging doubts, you just remember everybody has them.
Mm.
And the other way I kind of tried to overcome it was asking people who I consider to be very, very good at what they do for help and advice, right? Because for me, making plans and leveraging things like frameworks and decision-making models and things like that, that really helps me. Like that helps me focus, and I feel much more confident when I have a plan in my mind. And I like having a plan, and like I've found a lot of frameworks to work with, and that's actually something that you and I talked about, and I'll probably like
Hmm.
touch on a little bit is some of like the frameworks that I've used as I've kind of grown in my career. At
Yeah.
least a couple of my favorites. Um,
So when
and there's things like fear of failure. You get used to it. It's okay to fail. You building resiliency is probably the most important thing that you can do in your career. You
mm,
know, because things are going to go wrong.
yeah.
It's the only guarantee.
I think that's that's a good point because even when we look at like everything in society nowadays, where it's almost like so much is just hinged on one thing that we almost forget that like failure is part of the process, and many of us that are seek to achieve, we become real hard on ourselves, and that one failure tends to be hard to eat. Did you experience that?
Yeah, probably the best advice I ever heard or I ever got was, at least when it comes to failure, is if you didn't fail, you didn't try.
Mm,
And is it worse to try and fail than to wonder,
mm,
And the best part is failure is not the end, right?
yeah.
Unless like your parachute fails, in which case,
Yeah.
still,
Yeah,
sometimes,
you got bigger problems.
yeah, you have bigger problems coming at you. But I'd say 90% of the times, as long as you're avoiding catastrophic failure, and that's one of the things to look out for, right? Is avoiding catastrophic failure, because there's two types of failure. There's reversible and irreversible. Reversible, you get after it, right? Like, what's the worst that can happen? Oh, it didn't work. Okay,
Mm,
now I know. And for those things that are just really knock you in the teeth hard, you have to build resilience. You have to build uh, calluses, and it's really hard.
mm,
And the only way to get there is to basically work that muscle, right? For things to go wrong, because it's like growing your muscles, right? Your muscles don't grow when you're comfortable. They grow when you're uncomfortable, when you're putting them through work and tearing them apart. You don't. Nobody grows in comfort.
right. Right. That's true on so many levels. So when you hit some, you hit upon some of the affirmations you used for overcoming the imposter syndrome. How'd you come up with them? Was it just like, hey, I need to like have positive talk to myself? Did you reference, past things that you were successful as, like kind of, levels of encouragement? Tell me a little about that process.
Yeah, no, it's a great question. For me, I consider myself a pretty confident guy. I'm pretty confident in my abilities. I
Hmm.
know that there are things that I'm good at. I know there are things I'm really bad at, but I think for the most part, like, the things that I'm good at, I'm pretty good at. Um, so, and it's not like it happens every day that I'm sitting there, I'm like, oh my God, what am I doing? But like there are those moments of doubt, right? Like
Yep.
they show up when things aren't going well, when you're like, I don't know what to do here. And so it was a moment of what do I do about that? Like, why am I feeling this way when it's like I clearly have skills, clearly have knowledge. Maybe I don't know what to do in this situation, but it's making me doubt myself entirely. So
Hmm.
trying to figure out your point, affirmations or a model to overcome that became kind of important to me. Because it's like, it's I don't know why it makes it easier knowing that other people feel this way, but I guess like, misery loves company, maybe like that social proof, right? You're not the weirdo just sitting there like, oh, what do I do?
Yeah, 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 yeah. Got it. So it sounds like it was a combo of like realizing other people feel the same way and then trying to dig some of those affirmations for yourself. Is that right?
Yeah, exactly. And it kind of led me down a path too of like, oh, there are ways that to handle things, right? There are
Hmm.
these things, different models to adapt and make available to yourself to make your life easier, and that's it, like we talked about, like the different frameworks and models for thinking about decision making and prioritization and things like that.
Yeah.
They
Let's dive in on that part because I know that was some things that you and I spoke about, and I think it was interesting. So when you're leading your team and you're coming with this decision making process for yourself, what are some of the frameworks to whatever extent you're able to speak to them on? Obviously, I don't want to put you in a position, but if you got stuff going on with the company, obviously, but wherever you get whatever you're freedom to speak of,
Yeah,
what was
absolutely,
the
absolutely.
process?
And there's a couple, right? And I think there's a couple that I'll touch on. They kind of revolve around decision making, prioritization, and then like what's called the PPT model, which I'll kind of get to in a second. And I really got into frameworks and like models and applying them, adapting them and applying them in my life, because of Charlie Munger, right? Like Warren Buffett's business partner. I really got into this mindset when I probably my early mid 20s when I was actually reading about his list of mental models.
Hmm.
Um, and it was like a light bulb went off in my head. And for anyone listening who's not familiar with mental models, they're basically mental shortcuts for our brain. Um, and they're a mental shortcut that our brain uses to view and understand the world more quickly. So, for instance, opportunity cost, right? So you're probably familiar with that term if you take an
Right.
economics class. It's a mental model for thinking about if you do one thing, it probably means you won't be able to do another thing, and therefore that opportunity was lost, right? So I tell you opportunity cost, click where your brain understands what that means, right?
Mm-hmm.
So it's basically mental shortcuts to get to conclusions, conserve mental energy. It's all biological because the brain is lazy, right?
Right.
And I was thinking, it's like, man, these are like mental apps, right? You press an app on your phone and everything sort of happens. It doesn't have to, go through each line of code. It's like if you get in your car and you start driving, you're not like, oh, pedal down, turn left. You just know what to do. You've internalized it. You get in the car, you press the mental application for drive, and you know how to do it. It's like,
Mm-hmm.
how do I apply that to other parts of my career? Like, what is out there? And that's what kind of got me down sort of the framework, model approach rabbit hole. And some of my favorite ones, right? So prioritization. I find a lot of times it's easy to get caught up in analysis paralysis, like sitting there, like, what do I do?
Yeah,
What should
this
I
is a
be
big thing
doing
for a lot
today?
of people.
Yeah, and I'm not immune to it, right? Because there's a million things I could be doing. So one of the frameworks was that I really liked was applying the essential thing. What's that one thing? Um, and it allows you to kind of get laser focused on what's most important, right? What are you trying to achieve in the mid, short, and long term? Excuse me.
Hmm.
Um, And if you're working on your day and you're sitting there and you're thinking, if I could only accomplish one thing today and nothing else, what would that one thing be? And that, it kind of helps to cut through the noise. Because you're thinking it's like, well, I can only accomplish one thing. And I can tell you, like, that's another thing is like if you accomplish one thing a day, it adds up. Like that
Right.
consistency adds up, but it helps you kind of isolate what's that most important thing. And it might be what's most valuable to the company. What's your goal for the year, short term, long term. What's your department goal, and how's that feeding to the business?
Hmm.
And when things are getting really noisy, and you're like, okay, I got to cut away the noise. I can only do so many things. What is the most important thing I should be doing today? That's what I try to apply. And it allows you to be absolutely ruthless when it comes to setting your priorities, which I've had to do because I started in a small business, right? Like I've been working in a small business where you're wearing a lot of different hats, and sometimes you just have to let things burn. You try to run around and put out as many fires as you can, but you decide, all right, there's a fire over here, but this fire is about to burn the house down, so I'm going to focus on that. And
Yeah.
once that's under control, like that's that most important thing. But then it's like, okay, let's refocus on what is the goal and the strategy. And one of the things that, besides that, right, like what is that the most important thing for the company? I've found that prioritizing using it's called impact effort matrix. So basically, it's these four quadrants of high effort, low effort, high impact, low impact. So if
Hmm.
you have to choose one thing to do or one choice against another, it's just a framework for weighing options against each other. You should almost always focus on the low effort, high impact things, right? Like that's kind of a
Right.
no-brainer
Absolutely.
once you actually see it. Because if you look at stuff and you're like, oh, that's a lot of work and it's little impact,
Right.
where are you going to do it? You know?
Yeah. I think, everything you're going over and you talked about, essentially just a lot of understanding, but clarity, I think is, and you and I talked about this, right? It's one of the most important, most powerful things somebody can have is clarity around their decisions. Because when you have clarity, the actions you take are so much more precision. You mentioned being ruthless in what you're going after, and the frameworks you just spelled out helps to create that clarity for you and around you, so that like that action you take is just like, hey, it's pinpointed, it's direct. You're not getting pulled in 10,000 different directions. And you mentioned analysis by or paralysis by analysis, right? I think that's that comes from a like a symptom of almost perfectionism, right?
Absolutely.
You're
We
trying to
all
do
we all want to be perfect, right?
right.
Or at least most people. We all want to do a good job and feel like we're doing a good job. And I have found, to your point, exactly clarity. Clarity is kind, right? Like giving clarity
I
to your
like that. I
teammates,
like
giving
that.
clarity to your customers, giving clarity to your friends, right? Like where they stand. It allows you to crystallize in your mind what's important, and it gives you um, the dry powder essentially to say the hardest word. You
Yeah.
know?
And I think clarity too is it's, you mentioned friends too, because it's one of those things where it's so powerful, not even just from a professional standpoint, but also from a personal standpoint, right? And it just makes life easier. And we get so wrapped up in our worlds, our thoughts, our emotions, opinions of ourselves. And I think one of the things too is like people will get so concerned of what other people think of them, but in reality, we're all just kind of thinking of ourselves.
Yeah.
You know what I mean? So, and it's when you're able to pull all of those nuggets out and then find that clarity in life at this point, right?
Mhm.
That's where things just become so much more powerful.
Well, that's what I tell the people when they first start going to the gym and they feel self-conscious about it and like they're like, "Oh, I don't want to go." It's like nobody's looking at you.
Yeah,
Everyone's focused on their own thing, right? Like they're all stuck in their own brain. Like some people will look, but like that's just life.
yeah,
But for the most part, I'd say 90% of the people who are in there, they're thinking the same thing. And they're
yeah.
thinking and they're just focused in their own little world, their own little head. We're all the heroes in our own mind. You know what I mean?
Isn't that interesting to think of? You could have like you got 10 people at a gym, right? For example, and all 10 of them could be concerned that other people are looking at themselves, but they're not looking at anybody else. They're just worried about themselves.
Right.
So
Right.
right, you end up in this scenario, and that clouds judgment, that clouds, your clarity around everything. And yeah, it's just it's amazing. And the models you spoke of are really useful. And I think when you could pull strings from a personal standpoint too, of understanding behaviors, understanding emotions, and understanding why you do what you do. And sometimes it's hard for us to go down that route, and admit that moment of failure. In a sense, it can be, I mean, failure is a wrong word, I think, because I think you only fail when you quit, you know and when you go through that route of being able to admit some of that like uncomfortable moment, clarity comes from it.
Absolutely.
Yeah,
It's being comfortable being uncomfortable.
that's my
When you
slogan, man.
get
You took it on me. Kidding.
when you're comfortable being uncomfortable, you're starting to live. You know what I mean? Like you are stronger, you're more resilient. You can stand when the winds are blowing
Yeah.
against you,
let
and
me
it
let
will
me ask
happen.
let me ask you this, because I think anybody who has professional aspirations, or aspirations in general for that matter, there's an element of growth of, hey, I want to grow and get better. And we all kind of have these underlying reasons. And you know feel free to elaborate as much as you want. Don't feel like obligated to go too deep. But and what motivates you? What makes you tick? To go into work, have to wear all the hats, to go through all the stress. What drives you?
Good. And various things that drive people, right? Like, is it money? Is it power? Is it, the acceptance of others? For me, I like building things, and I like
Mm,
solving problems. And I've been very lucky at this job, in that it's been worth like a dozen MBAs, right? Because I've learned so many things about so many facets of so many different parts of the business, what works, what doesn't. You talk about failing and trying again. Um, and I've come to the conclusion I just really enjoy seeing things grow, right?
yeah.
And, is the money nice? Yes, the money is important, right? But you get to a certain point where the money becomes almost a point system, right? Like it's just a way of keeping track, just a way of keeping, as long as the lights are on and like that you're growing a little, you're growing and it's trying to win the game, you know? To me, business should be fun. Your career should be fun.
Yeah.
Um, and don't get me wrong, there are moments of stress. I
Hmm.
think if you're not stressed, you're not pushing yourself hard enough, right? Um,
The good stress.
a good stress, right? And that's another thing. Like for any person getting like, directors or vice presidents or whoever, right? Getting to these different parts of their lives, anyone in their career, I think America has a working problem, right? Like it's really hard to find that work-life balance. You go on Instagram for 5 minutes and it's like, well, you should be running twice a week and lifting 3 times a week and doing mobility training and sleeping 8 hours and eating breakfast, lunch, and dinner and taking your kids to school and doing this. It adds up. It's like there literally are not enough hours in the day.
Yeah.
And then you just get bogged down and then you end up just scrolling on Instagram for 2 hours. It's like I
Yeah.
could have spent those hours running.
It's so true, because like, yeah, there's so many life hacks out there nowadays, right? It's wake up at 5 a.m., stare at the sun so that you help your circadian rhythm. I'm going off the stuff that I've seen, so I'm probably gonna go down like a rabbit hole here.
Yeah.
Wake up at 5 a.m., see the sunrise, and the sunrise, helps your circadian rhythm. And then make sure you drink water, and make sure you take a walk, so that then you have, you get red light viewing, and you got yoga and breathe all before you wake up. And then it's like, that's just the morning. And it's like, man, and like the people that I coach, you know, they, I think you're spot on, because so many people have this preconceived notion that they have to be doing a lot of these things to be successful. When in
Yeah.
reality, it's understanding what things can you take from all of that and implement into your life within reason. And I think one of the
Yeah.
things, and you hit upon it, and you and I talked about this the other day, was stress, right? The habits you implement into your day to day should not cause you more stress. It should add to it. Can there be a little bit of uncomfortability in the short term? Yeah, but like if you're 2 weeks in and you're trying to like muscle your way to get these habits in, something's missing. You got to adjust some things because you're right. Yeah, it's like and then you finish your day. You got to go to the gym. You got to drink your protein shake. You got to do this. You got to do that, and you got to stretch, and then you got to do yoga, and then make sure you breathe, meditate before you go to bed, and then make sure uh, all this stuff. So yeah, I, that's my rabbit
Yeah,
hole.
yeah, exactly. And you know what? I like Huberman's Lab as much as the next guy, but
Yes,
I
yeah.
think what I feel like what people miss from him, because I do love the way he lays it out and the science and the reasons. He's giving you tools. He's giving you tools for your
Yeah.
tool belt, right? And that's all it is. Any Everyone's got an angle and they're trying to approach things. This is the only way to do it. The answer is there's a million ways to do it.
Mhm.
And it's just one.
Yeah.
And you take the tools that work for you and you work for your lifestyle and your career and you apply them in a way that works for you. And I mean, that's where coaching comes in, right? Like
Mhm.
coaches giving you the tools so you can help yourself. You know,
Yeah. Yeah.
at least that's
It's
what it's about for
and
me.
yeah, I mean, and it's too. It's true because it's when you get a second perspective. It doesn't even it doesn't have to be a coach. It could just be a boss, a supervisor, friend, or a spouse.
Mentor, yeah.
Exactly, mentor. To your point, to be able to give you that objective feedback. Because to go back to my original point, like we get into our heads so much, and I do it myself. I the other day I was like getting really down on myself for just like one thing that was a result based thing, and then I like stopped and looked back at the day. The process that I accrued over the course of the day led to actually a positive outcome, but I was hung up on this one thing that I didn't get a result on, and I was like, wait, we're good. Just keep moving. So it's yeah, ways. So the one thing I did want to talk about that you and I chatted on was, and I thought was really cool, and you used the piano analogy with me, which is creating structure and guidelines for your team that still allow creativity within that realm and allows them to kind of, it's almost like, sounds like there's like rubber walls to kind of stay within. Am I kind of understanding that right? Is that,
Yeah. Yeah, no, great callback because I mentioned the PPT model, right? That's something I wanted to talk about. It's people, process, technology, right? It's an old school model that's been around probably since the 60s, but it works. It stands the test of time. And basically what it is, I mean, I'm sure you've seen it like business school and stuff, is like
mm,
you've got this triangle usually it's represented as like spheres, right? These three spheres that work together, or I like to think of them as like a pyramid with lines, right? There are three lines of people, process, and technology, and they all support each other. And they are essentially what make a business. You can't have one without the other.
right?
Some people talk about it like it's a stool with three legs. And if one is shorter than the others, then it topples over. If one's like super long, it's gonna like push it over. Um, and I agree. I think it works. Uh, but to me, and I promise I'm getting to your point,
You're
your
good. You're good.
question, um, is in terms of importance. I think that you can have priorities set in there. And to me, of those three, the technology is probably the least important. It is important, but it's the last priority.
Mm,
If you're small, I think the people are the most important thing because the people can bring you along for a long time. But once you
mm,
get to a certain point without process, things start to break, right? So think about your startups and,
mm,
you know, you have the founders and the leadership very close, right? So the vision is shared, communications open,
mm,
things can work. So as long as you have the right people, things won't break. But
mhm.
once you get to a certain point, you have to have the process, those systems. So the way that I've kind of start thinking about it is that, you know, you get the right people to build the systems because there's a lot of different types of people, but the two most important for me are builders and maintainers. People who can build the systems and people who can
Mhm.
work within them. And you have the right people who build those systems, and then you find the people and put the people into those systems who are the right fit for the job and for the system and can understand and grow within it.
Yeah.
And then you put it, then you bolster it with the right technology and the right tools. I say all of this because one of the pushbacks I get a lot of the time is that, oh, process, systems, procedures, SOPs. You're stifling people's creativity here, right? You
Mhm.
can't be creative, which I contend is BS, right? Because it's like asking somebody to operate in something as sophisticated as a business without a process or standards or some sort of system for them to work within is like setting somebody down in front of a piano and asking them to create music. They've never played. They don't understand that what music is. They don't understand what notes are. They don't understand the different scales because music has immutable, unbreakable laws that are driven by physics, right? You cannot break these rules. And they work. And there's a framework for it and a process to play. And you learn it so you can break the rules. But you can't sit here, no one can sit here and tell me that you can't be infinitely creative with music. And I think that business and using business systems is the same. Something changes, you
Yeah,
change the system.
that's awesome. I love that analogy because it speaks to a lot. You know, having run my own business, it's people can have this belief that systems and processes are just, you know, all of a sudden becomes this like rigid guideline, but it's not.
Right.
It's what you can operate within that. And then there's always, you know, when you have the right leaders in place, willing to bend where necessary, you know.
Absolutely.
So
Well,
yeah,
to beat the analogy to death, right? Like you can even take people with different types of systems and have a system of systems and have an orchestra, right? You can have your trombones and you can have your percussions and your violins, and they're all working together. But if they don't know the system, if they're not working in coordination, it's just noise.
yeah,
The
yep.
only difference between music and noise is process.
Mm, I like that. It's
I can't take
great.
credit for it. I think I heard it somewhere, but like I did like it.
You could pretend you did.
I invented that. That's mine.
Huh?
You can James Koble.
Oh yeah, 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 yeah. Put the quotations underneath.
Yeah.
Yeah, that's awesome, man. Um, anything else you want to add, man? Anything you want to, elaborate on?
Yeah, I mean, we've covered a lot of ground here, and let me check my notes real quick if I had any pearls of wisdom in here. Um, yeah, I guess like sort of closing remarks is career wise, probably one of the best books I ever read that really was just like ding ding ding, was a book called What Got You Here Won't Get You There.
Mm,
And for anybody who's in their career and wants to go anywhere that's not where they are right now, should read this book because a lot of the concept, broad strokes, is the skills that made you successful where you are may or may not translate to get you where you want to be.
yeah,
Right. Right. So like, if you want, if you want to be a leader of people, but you don't have any management skills, but you're a great coder, you might need to learn some management skills. So it's about skill acquisition. It's about growing yourself and being a forever learner.
yeah.
I think that's probably the most important thing that you can do.
It is. I think there's. I had a business slash life coach when I owned my business. That it was he got the point across a little more aggressively. It was um, the man you are now needs to die to become the man you want to be. It's the same concept, just you know, tenfolded in terms of intensity. But you're right, and I think it's as we go through life, you mean look at life stages too, man. It's you go from think of like where we were in college, right, and then look at where we are now. It's hard to look back and be like that's like a lot, like 6 lifetimes ago to imagine. That's
Different person, yeah.
and you have to grow. You have to go through that uncomfortability. You have to you have to fail a few times. You have to learn some frameworks. You have to operate within boundaries that you learn from. It all adds up over 1 year to the next, one position to the next, and it's pulling. Like I asked you, like, what's the motivation? And you said for you, it's essentially like a game. It's for you from what it sounds like is it's you love creating, you love building. And I think it's important too that everybody finds their passion.
I mean, don't get me wrong. I like going on nice vacations too, but like that's not the motivator, you know.
Yeah. Um, but across the board, this stuff you pay for, play or pull from. So cool, awesome, brother. Well, hey, this was a lot of fun, and we'll have to do it again sometime.
Absolutely, yeah. Thank you for having me on, Sam. I think you're doing a great thing here. I hope this really it helps people. My my 30-minute ramblings. But
It was all good, man. It was good content.
fantastic. Yeah, no, hope to come on again, and thanks for having me on, man.
Absolutely, brother. All right, ladies and gentlemen, if you like what you heard and you got some value out of this, drop us a 5-star review on Spotify or subscribe on YouTube. Share this, comment it. Much love, and we'll talk to you all soon.
Peace.